All right. Well, first of all, everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Betsy and FannibalFest organizers for inviting us onto this panel. So like Betsy mentioned, I've run a couple of these before at the live events. So unfortunately, I guess this year, we're on Zoom, but that actually allows us, I think, to have people all over the world together at the same time. And I think that's really wonderful as well. So I just want to introduce a little bit the panel itself, the concept behind the panel. I'll let the attendees introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about the ground rules and the flow of the discussion. So first of all, why versions of the truth? So I think, we've in the past often picked quotes from the show. This is a quote from the show. So this comes from a dinner in True Normand with Will and Freddie at Hannibal's house, and they're talking about Freddie ghostwriting Abigail's novel. So this was originally a kind of snarky comment, but it's interesting because this is very early in the show, but it encapsulates a little bit the one way, I guess, for us to think about Brian Fuller's canon as a kind of version of the truth of Hannibal, which was previously established with the novels and then the movies, a way to think about fan fiction and also a way to think about how we think about canon. So even within the canon, you've got versions of the truth. You know, what Freddie has written about Abigail, which may or may not be the truth or a version of the truth, then the version of the truth that Hannibal and Will established, the version of the truth that Brian Fuller establishes, and then our truth around that. So that kind of leads us into, I guess, our experience with establishing versions of the truth. So I've been in Hannibal fandom for quite a few years. I watched the show during the season 1 hiatus, so it would have been in 2014. I'm Petronia on AO3 and on Twitter, Jennifer on Tumblr, and I think on Tumblr I was probably more well known for writing meta. So I have like a whole bunch of essays going on that are logged on Tumblr. And in terms of fanfic, probably I think in terms of popularity, my most popular one is the Here trilogy. And my second most popular one is probably Black Swan, which is like an AU in which Hannibal is a murderous swan. So I will go around the table. So Theo, can you introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Fading Glass Rose on Twitter, and ironically enough, a Glass Rose never fades on AO3, which is probably what I'm more known by. Pronouns he or they. I guess I'm probably most well known for De Profundis, which is my ABO anagram, and it is the first fanfic I ever posted online ever. And possibly also known for my Beauty and the Beast AU, The Thorn of the Rose. Is there anything else I needed to add there? I don't think so.
Okay. Alex?
Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm Alex. I'm Fragile Teacup everywhere. My most well-known fanfic, I suppose, would be Ethics and Aesthetics, which is my ABO Hanagram version of Pride and Prejudice. And then I guess The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, probably, which was the first long fic that I did for this fandom. The year after I landed in fandom, which was in October 2015, when I was drawn in by all the fanfic, and then I found my way to Tumblr and then Twitter, and never left.
Allegra?
Hi, I'm Allegra Lovelace on Twitter. I have a different pseudonym on AO3, and I can't say I'm well known for any specific Hannigram. I haven't really written Hannigram. It's probably very late to admit this at this point. I've written more Maidency, which is more, fiction about Hugh Dancy and Mads Mikkelsen. I can't really say if it's well known at all, but it's a lot of fun to play with with the characters in this way.
Thank you, Allegra. I think you're well known. Meg?
Wait, Meg or?
Kazu, since you're on.
Well, I'm Kazu. I go by Nisei Kazura on AO3 and Twitter. My pronouns are she, they. I am a pretty new Hannibal writer. I just joined the fandom like a year ago, last summer, at around this time in August. I'm also not sure if I'm really known for any specific fic, but the fic on my AO3 that has the most hits and kudos is an Omegaverse fic called The Positive Effects of an Omegan Thrall. So I guess that can be my claim to fame.
All right, thank you. Meg, are you okay to introduce yourself?
I don't think Meg's going to be speaking. She's just like
Okay.
me. We're just here.
Okay, all right, no problem. All right, okay, so thank you, everybody. So just a couple of really quick ground rules. So the chat is moderated, as you've seen within the chat itself. We've decided to kind of group our questions into slightly more thematic, sections, and we've carved out a little bit of time for darker topics because this is a very dark show, and sometimes our fics go into dark places. So we've carved around some time for darker topics. I will flag that when it comes up, and then panelists as well, if they have answers where they know are going to get into potentially some topics that are triggery for people, will sort of raise their hand and let the chat know, so folks can mute it, and then we'll make a hand signal so that you can unmute it once that topic is over. The recording will be posted to YouTube afterwards, so if you can't make it or you can't make all of it, it will still be there for everyone to view. Okay, so with that, we're going to get started. So we're going to just really jump in and talk about the writer's experience and the writer's practice within Hannibal. So the first question here, What's for Dinner on Twitter asks, what has your experience been like writing in the Hannibal fandom? Is there something specific that gives you the most enjoyment or the biggest headache? So I thought that was a nice intro question to your experience. And I'll just open it up. Alex.
There we go. Ooh, good question. I think that my experience of this fandom is the only experience of writing in any fandom that I've ever had. And so I think I've been very lucky in that it is such a supportive fandom and full of amazing talent. I mean, you could have 20 of these Zooms and still have room for more of the talented writers that we have. So I started in 2016, but I have been writing for years and years and years. The interesting thing is, I realized once I started writing for Hannibal that what I'd been writing before was absolute shit. Can I say that? It was terrible, really terrible. I don't know if any of you are aware of Mills and Boon, Harlequin romances.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote one of those. It didn't get published. Thank the Lord. I wrote the whole thing, an entire novel, and it is so atrocious. And I only realized that when I started writing fanfic, because the caliber of writing all around me was so high that it made me realize just what had to be jettisoned from my own writing and what I almost started again. It was almost like blank canvas. And so I think I'm incredibly grateful, because if I hadn't written for this fandom, I think I would still be churning out that utter rubbish. So that's, yeah.
Well, I think everything is a process, right? And speaking for myself too, I really feel that fandom was what taught me not only to write, but fandom taught me to be a reader, because when I was young, let's say a teenager, and I would just assume all published books were good. That was kind of my mentality. Like, well, if it was published, it must be good. And I think getting into fandom where you actually realize that everybody was an amateur and maybe some people were a little more practiced or a little more polished than others. And, I don't have to read this if I don't like it. And that actually was, I think, what taught me to distinguish as a reader between, good prose, bad prose that worked and prose that didn't work. Yeah, I think so. Anybody else? Kazu?
Yeah, so actually, I wrote in one fandom before this, but Hannibal fandom has really helped me because some of the people that I met in Hannibal fandom have completely changed my outlook on writing, and that made me write a lot more. Like, I've taken my writing a lot more seriously ever since I joined Hannibal fandom. So that definitely pushed me to work harder. As far as things that are specific that gives me the most enjoyment for writing for Hannibal fandom, I think my favorite thing about writing for Hannibal fandom is when I get to make fun of either Hannibal or Will, mainly Hannibal, because he's ridiculous. So if I get a chance to like throw in a jab at him in my fanfic, then I like to do that because it's fun. But something that is a headache for me, not specific to Hannibal fandom, but I actually surprisingly really hate writing smut, despite the fact that I write a lot of it, because I get really excited for a lot of the ideas, but the execution like gets me all tied up in knots. So.
How about you, Theo?
Yeah, I have to agree with a lot of what's already been said. Like, the best thing for fandom about me, gosh, I can't talk today. The best thing about fandom to me is just that, especially with the Hannibal fandom, it's been years since it's been off the air, and it's only growing bigger. Like, and I'm meeting new people all the time who are just so incredible, and I feel like it's done a lot for my writing as well. Like, to me, like, the only writing I pretty much do at this point is for this fandom, and I don't really do much for anything else. And it's kind of fun in sort of a selfish way, I guess, to see how my writing has also grown, like from my first fic that I posted to what I'm writing right now, and just sort of seeing that progress. That's one of my favorite things on a more selfish level, I guess, is getting to see how I've kind of developed over time. And I get to see that with other people too, when I look at their writings and I go back to their older stuff versus their newer stuff, and I kind of see where everyone sort of hits their flow. And I don't know, it just feels like being a part of like a really cool writing and art team and everything. And you're always learning something new from the show. Like, every rewatch, there's some new concept that comes up, and you're like, oh, how can I implement that into my latest fic or something? Because I never saw this connection before, and I really love that.
Yeah, well, I think it attracts people with an eye for detail because Brian Fuller is somebody with an eye for detail, and so it's like, something like a Kubrick movie where really every detail that's on screen or that in the sound mix or what have you is very controlled and is designed to kind of have its specific effect, and I think it attracts a lot of people who are great artists or have great potential to be artists because of that, and I would include our panelists in that group. So I'll move on to the next question. So Colleen Dono25 on Twitter had a few questions. The first one is, some writers prefer to write stories with pen and paper when creating because it helps their thought process. Others use computers. Which method do you use? I'll just throw it open.
Okay, I'll start because I also realized I didn't answer part of the last question, which was what do you really enjoy writing? Which would be dialogue. I love writing dialogue. It's such a challenge to try and make it anywhere near as amazing as the dialogue on the show. And the thing that nothing annoys me about writing, but I feel when I'm writing canon era, I feel a huge responsibility to try and get that right. So I think I have more fun with AUs just because I know I can get away with a lot more. But actually, secretly, I'm kind of hankering after canon a bit. So What was this question?
Computer or pen and paper?
Right.
And why?
Okay. When I started writing, for the first couple of years, I wrote everything on my phone. In the notes section of my iPhone, everything.
Oh
And
gosh.
yeah, even the trilogy of The Marriage of Heaven and Hell was all written on my phone. I think the first thing I wrote on computer was ethics and aesthetics, but even that, it was half and half. Now I'm more about writing on the computer, on the laptop. I don't tend to use pen and paper for writing anymore, which I don't know why. I think I'm always scared. What if something happens to the notebook or something?
Yeah. No, that's a good point actually, because I do myself use Google Docs a lot. So I write on my computer. But I use cloud-based documents because I'm afraid that things will get lost. And I also do want to be able to access it. If I'm really working on something, I will be working on that instead of playing Candy Crush if I'm standing in line at the bank or something like that. So, it's nice to have it on my phone. I do actually do work on things on my phone a little bit every once in a while. Um, I do like pen and paper as well. I started writing fanfic as a teen, when you only had one computer in the house, which was shared with your parents. So you were not necessarily on that all the time that you wanted to be writing anything. So I did get used to using pen and paper as part of my process. And that, before the advent of smartphones that you could really type on, and I was out there writing on notebooks sitting at at a coffee shop or that sort of thing. So I do also find that's fun. Theo?
Yeah, I've done a combination. I mostly do computer nowadays and pretty much just stick to it, even for outlining. It used to be I would take notes, like I would take outline notes and, ooh, that's a good quote I want to use somewhere in a notebook. And I've moved away from that and I just stick to computer now. I've never been able to do stuff like that on the phone, and I applaud anyone who can do that because that is amazing to me. What I would do instead if I don't have access to my computer and a idea hits me is I do have a notebook on hand for that. In fact, one of my shorter stories I wrote entirely on a road trip with my husband. Like while I was in the passenger seat, I wrote the whole thing just while we were on our way to Florida. So I kind of do a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah. Sometimes those are kind of like the best times to write when you're traveling, because it kind of knocks you out of your routine a little bit, and that kind of knocks you out of your mental routine a little, forces you to be a little more creative. Kazu, how about you?
I basically do everything on computer. I also mainly use Google Docs. I guess one thing though is like sometimes I switch programs. Like there's this one online program called Calmly Writer that you can use for free, and I really like using that because it has like these fun typewriter sounds. And for some reason, when I'm typing, I really like to listen to that. But I always copy it to Google Docs afterwards. I have tried handwriting some stuff before, like if I am like kind of out of my funk and I need to like switch gears sometimes, I might write a little bit on my notebook, but I edit heavily as I'm writing. So when I try to handwrite things, it usually ends up being like a bunch of scribbles. So I tend to use computer the most.
Okay. Allegra, how about you? Welcome back.
Hi, sorry, my computer crashed. I have my aircon on. Is it very audible because I can turn it off?
No, you have no background sound whatsoever, actually.
Awesome,
It's fine.
great. Okay. Yeah, so I used to start writing when I was a kid. I didn't know that what I was doing was called writing slash. I didn't have this concept, but I was already writing about men and having relations. And I started with handwriting, but I get so paranoid about it. I keep imagining people finding my notebook and then co-workers finding it or whatever. So I have to stop doing it. And I kind of started writing it only in my head for a while. And when I found fandom, transformative fandom through Harry Potter fanfic, actually, then I actually started writing on my phone. Then do you know how you write and then you copy what you wrote and you have this big blob of text and then you copy it in your Word fic, like in your Word document, and then you continue writing on your phone and then you copy and paste. And so I sent a copy of an explicit Harry Potter scene to a WhatsApp chat in mistake. So since then,
that seems like a recipe for frustration. Yeah.
Exactly. And I thought, okay, so I have to stop that. And since then, I'm very, very paranoid. I write only on my designated Mac at home, in my Word file, and somehow I also cannot write otherwise. I cannot concentrate otherwise because I feel so paranoid about people finding it.
Okay. Yeah, that is something. That is something. Okay. Next question. When you're writing, do you typically work on one fic at a time, or are you writing multiple fics at the same time? And do you have any tips for maintaining multiple ongoing works in progress at a time? So that's probably for people who really, well, I mean, it can be for people who really publish chaptered ongoing fics. I tend to write shorter stories, but I have written some chaptered fics. And I have to just say, I'm a very slow writer. So I just write it as it comes to me. And sometimes the momentum goes and sometimes the momentum doesn't go. And I have never promised steady updates or to update every 2 weeks or anything like that. And if I ever try to promise something like that, you got to stop me because it's pretty much not going to happen. But I truly, truly admire people who can do that. So, Allegra, what do you think? Do you write multiple fanfics at the same time?
I did actually. I have also, usually I try to stick to the formula. I write one big magnum opus, which I think is this large work in progress and should be updated every few weeks. And then at the side, I write what I call relaxation fics, just to keep my head off the one main thing. And I try to write silly stuff, whatever. But the problem is when you do that, then you get somehow occupied by these other stories and these other characters. And somehow your work in progress misses an update and then it misses the second update. And then, somebody is like, hey, please update. Yeah. And then blah, please update. And after 2 years, you look at this thing and you're just like, I don't want to look at it. It's like the pressure is too high. And
right.
So I think you should probably, I think probably I should keep this discipline of having one work and then finishing it and then starting the next one. That's something that I really want to do in future.
Okay. That's actually, so I'll let that question hang because the next question actually is, how do you cope with writing a mammoth fic? So this is from Avid Reader 2 on Twitter. How do you maintain momentum? How do you brainstorm the next step? So Allegra said that sometimes, she forks off to write kind of like palate cleansers, but that sometimes doesn't work out for her. Has that happened to anyone else? I mean, what else do you do to maintain that kind of sense of momentum?
Well, I've got 2 fics going at the moment, and an original novel that I'm trying to write as well. So I know this battle, and in fact, I don't think I've ever written one thing at a time. I have often wanted to get down to writing one thing at a time, but it just doesn't happen. And I think it's good to, well, I like alternating a little bit, because you can get into a little bit of a rut with one particular style. And the fics that I'm writing at the moment, one is modern canon, one is Regency, England. So you couldn't get more different genres or tones or styles. And I do find that I get to a point with one where I think, oh, I'm a little bit tired of writing do not you, Will? So let's go over to, let's have some more fluid dialogue and go back to the modern one. How do I keep on with it? I always used to have this thing in my head where I'd say I've got to write at least, at one stage it was 100 words a day. 100 words a day, I don't care how I feel, I'm just going to do it. And that helped a lot. And then a couple of months ago, I joined this little group on Twitter, which is 300 words a day. And it's called Novel 300. So I write 300 words of the novel every day, and because that gets me into the writing, you know, the juices get flowing, I then usually skip straight over and write some of Inconvenient, the work in progress I'm doing at the moment. And that helps. I've had nights, I remember once I hadn't slept at all the night before, and the whole day I was like a zombie, and I thought, but I've not done my 300 words. I've got to do it. And I was literally falling asleep over the computer, but I ground out 301 words. And if I wasn't doing that thing, I would never be. I think I'm up to about 38,000 words on that now in 2 months. So I think, yeah, set little goals. Perhaps that helps me.
Yeah, good luck with that project. Sounds very exciting. Theo, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty historically known for very slow, erratic updates, and it never being clear which story I'm going to update next, because I've juggled like 4 or 5 different works in progress at a time, which always felt like a recipe for disaster. Especially if like you have something like you're writing 2 different ABO fics at once. I've done that in the past, and it's like, oh, well, nodding is a thing in this one, but then I made sure I changed the dynamics, and there isn't that in this other one. So what do I do? Like, one of the things that really slowed down my process all the time was that I'd constantly be rereading what I'd already written in different, whatever I was currently working on, just to make sure I wasn't confusing it with something else. So I've kind of learned how to get away from that with my newest story. I'm now at a point where I'm actually doing Saturday updates every single week, and I'm only focusing on that one story to do it. And it's been such an amazing feeling, because historically I'm known for like going back and just taking months to post anything, and then it's like, oh, I posted something for this story this month, and then the 2 months pass, and then I'm posting a chapter for a different story, and it's just it just gets out of hand. And then before you know it, pretty much all of my works in progress except for my newest one are like years old at this point, and still going, because that was always my thing. And it's something, I guess something with being quarantined made it click, where it took a couple of months, but then just sitting at home all the time, I was like, I'm going to try to do something weekly. I got a little bit ahead in my newest story, and I now actually get to the point where I'm caught up, and I don't have anything written ahead anymore, but I'm comfortable knowing that I can write an entire chapter in 1 week and get it done. And it's a pretty awesome feeling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like being on a enforced writer's retreat, right? You know, so you don't have any kind of distractions. So, I mean, my problems actually tend to be plot related, you know, not so much characterization related. So sometimes I'll encounter kind of like a naughty problem, you know, with regards to plot, and then I would just like stop because I couldn't think it through with my like conscious mind, and maybe 6 months later I would kind of think it through with my subconscious mind, you know. But I think if you're in the context where you don't have anything else going on, I mean, people move out to the woods, right? To writers, professional writers, to kind of get that type of environment, to try to create that kind of cocoon around yourselves. Kazu, how about you? Do you write long fics?
I don't really. All of my fics are one shots, so I'm not really the best one. I'm not really the best person to ask. But I do have some advice on how to maintain momentum, I guess, like general advice on that, because I had a breakthrough about that like this past year. I basically realized that I can't keep putting off writing in favor of other things like school or other obligations. And I realized that by doing that, I was basically denying myself enjoyment and happiness, because writing is what makes me happy. And I decided that doing something that makes me happy is just as important as like school and other stuff. So I started prioritizing writing just as much as everything else. And that definitely boosted my productivity and made me write a lot more. But like, just as a warning at the same time, if you decide to like change your thinking like that, don't pressure yourself too much either, because that's just a recipe for burnout. Like, don't turn writing into a burden or something that feels like a chore.
Those are wise words. Okay. So a couple more questions about kind of like the nitty gritty of the practice. So do you have a writing schedule, and do you use any kind of writing app like Grammarly, Hemingway to polish up your work? So Grammarly, will have grammar suggestions, and so there are other apps that do that as well for you. Does anybody use anything like that? Maybe not. I don't.
What was the first part before the apps?
What's your writing schedule? Do you have a writing schedule?
Yeah, I think I just mentioned that I used to be horribly erratic to the point where it literally took me 3 years to finish a 4-chapter fic, for an example. And now I'm feeling pretty, I don't know what word I was going to say baller, which is a word I never use. I don't know why I was about to say I feel pretty baller now.
Well, maybe it's descriptive. Maybe that is the descriptive word for how you're feeling.
Yeah. Like, just being able to do the weekly updates is just such an amazing thing now. And I actually feel this confidence that once I'm finished with this story, I can go back to my other ones that have been sitting open, and I can start doing, like, focus on one of those, start getting that out weekly now, and then do the next one and do that. And it's pretty awesome. As for the app part, I don't use any to like polish like Grammarly or anything like that. I do use a different sort of word program than probably I feel like most people do. I actually use Scrivener for Windows now. I used to just use Microsoft Word, but I got the Scrivener for Windows beta, and seriously, it has changed my life so much. Like I mentioned, I used to take notes in notebooks, and part of the reason I don't do that anymore is because Scrivener is so handy for note-taking and like having stuff off in the margins off to the side. I have, instead of opening a new document for every chapter of a story, I now have all of them in one document, and I can piece things out by scene, I can piece things out by chapter, whatever feels most comfortable for me, and it really helps with my productivity in a way I did not expect it would do. It's been seriously, genuinely life-changing for me. So anyone, I would honestly recommend it. If you do the beta on Windows, it's free. If you have a Mac, I think you have to pay for it. Or if you get like the older version on Windows, you have to pay for it. But at the moment, and I definitely will pay for it when it finally comes out of beta, because it's super worth it to me.
Yeah, and I actually also have an app that I use called Story Planner, which is paid. It's just kind of like a one-time payment. I think it was probably around 15 Canadian dollars. Don't quote me on that. But it is actually just a nice outlining tool. And what it does is it kind of allows you to create kind of like a summary of different chapters. But what you can do, which is nice, is if you have multiple plot threads going on in a longer story or a novel, you can kind of, it allows you to sort of structure it nicely so that you're not losing track of some of these subplots for a long time, because you're more focused on advancing the other ones, and it kind of allows you to balance out the different subplots, different characters who are involved in the subplots. It'll tell you how much screen time they've gotten in the text so far. So I find that kind of thing actually really useful to me when I'm trying to write something a little more novel length, and have actually not been really successful. So I do actually need that kind of help.
What's that called again?
It's just called Story Planner. Story
Okay.
Planner. Yeah. So I've had fun using that. You know, I think especially if you're trying to write something via Snowflake method, you know, like a screenplay or something like that. If you ever end up doing something like that, I think that tool will be super useful. Okay. You know what? So now there's actually a whole bunch of questions around the joys of research. So we have a question by Honey Obsessed. How much research is involved when you write a Hannibal fanfic? So I'm just going to cover all of these. Gerhard Anzi asks, how do you deal with treading into areas you know nothing about, can't really research either, but still want to be accurate? So we can talk about what that might entail. And then 4Round had this question to the previous panel. I think they didn't get to it. So given that you research eras, people's jobs, what people wore, anything like that, has writing fan fiction changed who you've become today? And I think there were a couple of other questions as well, but they were pretty much around the same idea about wanting to know how you do research, how much research you do, and what impact has that had on you? Kazu, let's start with Kazu. Not to put you on the spot.
Okay. I'm actually kind of a bad writer in that I really, really hate research. I find it annoying, and I usually like to just make things up if I can. But in my opinion, if you're running into a problem where you don't know enough about something and you find that you can't really research it, you really only have 3 options. One is either you try to cut out that detail if it's a detail that you can cut out. The second thing is you just have to try to research harder. Like, you might need to physically go to a library or museum, or pay for an academic article, or maybe even like reach out to a professional that you've never spoken to before. Or, like I said, you can just make it up. That tends to be what I do.
Okay. Theo?
Yeah, I normally haven't done a lot of research. Most of my stories in the past, that's another thing that's weirdly changed about the one I'm writing now, is that I've done way more research just for it probably than I've done for any other of all of my stories combined, probably. And it's for like really random, obscure things that I know no one but me is going to even care about in the story anyway, because it's sort of a period fic. It takes place in the late 90s. So I've done so much research on just making sure I know stuff like, when did certain video games release? What kind of technology was available? How fast were their modems? Like, even though I haven't even mentioned dial-up or use of it in the story yet, I wanted to make sure I know, like, what speeds were they at? Like, just knowing all of this different random stuff. I wanted to know about like homeschooling laws in Maryland in the 90s, and that's one that was really hard for me to find. I kind of just had to base off of what's currently written, because I couldn't really find stuff from, what was it, in 1997, 1998. So just going with that for like stuff like, how does homeschooling work? Like, what kind of paperwork and stuff do you have to do for that? Even though that's probably not going to come up in the fic either. And what kind of child labor laws were there? Like, just weird, random stuff. And that's probably the most I've ever done research before in my life for a story. And it's for mostly things that no one's even going to know about and barely will even get a mention.
Look, you know, there's a lot of people in the chat right now saying that we all remember the battle days of the 90s and the modems were extremely slow, glacially slow. You know, and I hate to say this for myself and all the other people who remember the 90s, but the 90s, you know, when you're writing about the 90s, it's basically a historical novel now, you know. So it's 25 years ago, it's 30 years ago. So you've got to kind of proceed accordingly, you know, and I think that's great. You know, it kind of, you know, I think my own approach to research is actually that I'm somebody who would be mentally going down all kinds of rabbit holes regardless. You know, I'm the kind of person who would just be like, I'm going to follow this particular rabbit hole just for one fortnight or something and down really to the logical conclusion. And actually, a lot of the time, in Hannibal fandom, not necessarily in other fandoms, but in Hannibal fandom, a lot of my fics go the other way around. It's actually because I got interested in researching something, and that related back to something about the show. Because what's really nice is that Hannibal is that type of person. And he's the type of person who's got to be an absolute expert in everything that he takes up, and to have the galaxy brain knowledge about every single topic that he talks about. And so he and Will are actually constantly going down these rabbit holes. And Will's approach is more like, I'm not going to show it off, but I can actually match you for this every step of the way. So they really actually go into these rabbit holes, and you can actually push that information through these characters without making it seem like a total info dump. That's how they actually talk in the context of the canon. They use all sorts of bizarre metaphors and data that's kind of drawn from all over the place. So it's actually easy to start off with something bizarre like ortolans, or the what was it on the show, right? Like the mating rituals of snails, and then pull that back into Hannibal the show. I see you nodding, Alex. Is that something you also do?
Yeah, it's because it's such a study in microcosms, this show. It's just, I suppose because, and you've said it before, Jennifer, that Brian, his research when he came up with this show was so precise, was so detailed in every aspect, that it certainly makes me feel as a writer that if I'm going to present something that I don't know anything about, I'd better research it really, really thoroughly. Because I always feel like I don't want to get away with being inaccurate, even if no one else notices it. And then when it comes to the period fics that I do, it's a perfect recipe for me, really, because I can put together Hannibal, and I can put together my love of Jane Austen, and which goes back many, many years. I mean, I don't know if it's because my parents were teachers, and so the books on our shelves, I mean, when I was 10, I was pulling Jane Eyre off the shelf and reading it for pleasure, because those were the books that were on our bookshelves. Which sadly I know is not the case for a lot of the kids that I teach now, because I'm a teacher, an English teacher, which means that I get into, I teach literature, have to get into a lot of historical context, because the students need to know the context of the text that we're studying. So then I can feed all of that back into my writing as well, because I'm always, we do a huge amount of studying 19th century texts. So I kind of use my job to help with my writing. So yeah, rather than trying to tie myself in knots, going after research for things that I've got no idea what I'm writing about. So I tend to stick to what I sort of know, I suppose.
Okay. I actually, to make a sidebar, there was a question specifically for you from Colleen Donald. I love period movies. When rewatching them, I'm also thinking in the back of my mind how they would play out as Hannigram. So do you have more Regency period stories that you're thinking of writing? I don't know if she means based on movies or not.
Well, I have a thing about the movies. The movie versions of Austen, I don't like them. I know I'm probably in the minority, but was it the 2005 Pride and Prejudice? It was just that, you had Mr. Darcy striding over the moors with his shirt half open. Well, he'd have got pneumonia, and he would never have gone to call so early on a lady. So I was sitting there thinking, what is going on here? They got Lady Catherine de Bourgh calling on Elizabeth Bennet in the middle of the night? No, it would never happen. So I do have sort of plans in my head for more of the book-based fics. Possibly, I don't know. It depends if people get sick and tired of it, because I did Ethics and Aesthetics that was based on Pride and Prejudice. And then I wrote Nakama, which is based on Emma. I'm not sure everyone wants me to go through every Austen work because it can get a bit samey. I don't know. We'll see. I'll see how Inconvenient goes down. Because I've only posted 5 chapters of that, so we'll see.
As inspiration strikes you. Allegra, how about you? What's your approach towards research?
This is really the worst question for me because I don't know if anyone knows what I write, but there is no research involved. I mean, one problem for me is also because, I mean, I have the memory span of a fruit fly. So even if I read stuff, I immediately forget. My stories are not much of a story. It's more about really, may I be explicit in this chat, or is it frowned upon?
Well, you can be explicit. If there's anything that you think might be triggery, just mention it, you know?
I just wrote a CN in my chat. I hope that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically my stories are like 99% fucking. So it's like, you know, there's not so much research to do. It's a lot of Omegaverse. So I admit that's the only thing I really tried to research is this whole knotting thing. That was something I thought, okay, I have to be accurate here. You know, Victorian period stuff, not important, but that stuff, definitely important. That was the only thing. And maybe now I'm researching for an Omegaverse fic set in Vienna in the 19th century. So this is now the first time I'm doing research. So I've already researched random stuff like cooking recipes, cocktail recipes, and so on. And actually, I'm also highly appreciative of all the research tips that that you are giving right now.
Well, I think you know, and people have been saying this in the chat as well, but I think, you know, one incontrovertible thing in Hannibal fandom is you're researching recipes, right? You know, because Hannibal's got to cook, and so he's got to cook something, and unless that's what the fic is about, it's probably not going to be fries and burgers. So you're always constantly trying to come up with things that would be nice, you know, and basically doing the kind of job that Janice Poon was doing on the show. And Janice is a professional and we're not. So we're constantly trying to think of things.
I just want to say that now that you've said it, I definitely want to somehow insert a bit of Hannibal making some burgers and fries for me. Now that you've said it, I'm definitely going to have to include that at some point.
Well, they could be very, very gourmet burger and fries. You know, I'm a cookbooks person. I actually just got a Kenji Lopez Outs book. You know, he runs that Serious Eats blog. And he had a lot of very eye-opening tips about how you construct a burger, where that meat comes from, how you cook it, you know, the other ingredients that kind of go into it that make the type of burger that, I mean, you know, that's another rabbit hole that you can go down, you know. People fries, as it were. Okay, all right. So we're at the half point mark. So I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit. Sexy stuff. So I'm gonna list off some pairings. And so this is gonna be kind of like a lightning round, right? So pairings, sexy or not, why are they sexy? Why are they not sexy? Okay, so show your work. Let's start with an easy one, Hannigram. Sexy, not sexy.
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 For why, for me personally, they're toxic and obsessive, and I love that. Like, what else do you need in an OTP, right?
Anybody else? Like, why is it sexy?
Because they're both so powerful as characters, and it's like a battle, and it's not just physical, it's an intellectual battle as well. So I think that's there's this fantastic frisson on so many levels between them. I think that's what makes it sexy for me.
Yeah, I think the toxicity, I have to admit, is probably a factor, especially with all of the kind of stories I write. You probably can tell that that's a lot of what I'm drawn to is the darker stuff. So also the fact that Hannibal is, I pretty much down for just about anything. There are very few kinks that I could see him just being like, nope, that's just a hard no for me. I'm not gonna try that even once. So.
And because there's so much denial between them, and what's sexier than that? You know how desperately we know how desperately Hannibal wants Will. We know how desperately Will wants Hannibal, but denies himself, and that's incredibly sexy to me. The UST.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Allegra, you write Madansi, so is that different in terms of between Hannibal? I mean, it is actually very different, right?
Yeah. Actually, I like the public persona of Hugh Dancy and Mads Mikkelsen. They're both very likable men. At least the public persona. That's what I want to emphasize. And I am really not highbrow enough to write Hannigram. I try a little bit right now, but I have to admit it's complicated. I just want to write sex, to be honest. They're really hot. That's my whole raison. Yeah, that's my whole operandus, modi operandus, basically. I like Hannigram, but I have to admit, and I also like when I read meta and I read like essays and articles and I read Hannigrams, of course I get it. I get the tension and everything. But I mean, to me, it's like, yeah, I mean, Mads Mikkelsen is really hot and Hugh Dancy is really hot. And that's it. I operate on that base level.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, I agree. I agree with everything that everybody has said up to this point. But I also agree that, when you're talking about shows where I would say, stereotypically, right, people slash the two white male leads. I'm not always into the two white male leads in any given TV show. And not just the two white male leads, but basically every single person in this cast is like volcanically hot. So, that's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Can I just make a comment about the highbrowness of Hannigram? Personally, I agree that they're very highbrow, but as a writer, I don't usually do that justice. Like in a lot of my smut fics, the characterization has been completely butchered. But I find that that's actually what some people want in their smut. So usually I get by with it. So yeah, that was just a small comment I wanted to make.
And that's totally fine.
Smut anyway. I mean, like, it's just like Hannibal waxing poetic while he's CW, while he's rimming or something like that. Like.
Marlana. How about Marlana? How do we feel?
Oh, yeah.
Sexy?
I think they're very hot together and I ship them, but for me, they're a little bit too functional. So I find it really difficult to like imagine them in different scenarios because like, what happens?
Yeah.
There's no dysfunction going on.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, you kind of don't get to see you get a little glimpse of what happens with them privately, right? But you don't get a lot of them just kind of sitting around and interacting or having conversations. I mean, you've got a lot of that with Hannigram and some of the other pairings.
Yeah, the impression you get of them is that they're a lot more in sync, a lot more quickly than Will and Hannibal have gotten to, pretty much ever. It's like they clicked, and I haven't seen anything that really gives me much indication that there's a whole lot of conflict between them. They just get each other.
Yeah, and my very, very basic understanding of relationship dynamics for me is usually has to do with the power differential. Like the way I frame most of my character interactions have to do with some kind of power exchange. And I feel like Marlana are so like on the same level and equilateral that it's really difficult for me to figure out how that would work between them. So I do love them, I ship them, and I think they're very sexy, but I have no idea how I would write them by themselves. Like I do have a fix planned where Will is like kind of thrown in the mix, but Marlana just by themselves, I don't know how I would handle that.
Yeah, and I actually have written like, I write meta essays, and I actually had quite a long one that started out with the Hannibal fandom talking about how that really reflects a kind of fundamental I would say there are people in the world who care about power differentials in relationships when they consider what is romantic, and there are people for whom that's basically meaningless or something to be avoided, let's say in real life. Um, and I think those two groups of people, sometimes you see conversations in fandom where those two groups of people kind of talk past each other. You have people who are just like, I just can't stand to see this person top or bottom. And then the other half are just like, that's stereotypical. But really what you're talking about is a facet of power differential between two people in a relationship. It's expressed in a certain way. It's balanced out in the context of other aspects of that relationship as it's portrayed. And it's kind of like either you're into exploring the nuances of that, or those are not actually nuances that are meaningful for you and you're not looking for that. Maybe Marlana is for the people who are not into that. And probably I would say, in canon, maybe Margot and Alana have like had enough power differential in their lives with the men in their lives.
Yeah,
What about
definitely.
Badanable, what do we think about that? Bedelia and Hannibal.
Only if Bedelia is pegging Hannibal.
Very, very solid.
That's a good point, but for me, it's a hard no.
It's a hard no. Alex too, hard no?
I can't. I got very upset when I realised that they had actually slept together, and I was like, I'm not. More so than with Alana, where we actually saw it. Then I remember taking solace from something that Brian said in a commentary, where it was Hannibal is heartbroken, but no matter how he tries, neither Bedelia nor Anthony are substitutes for Will. So
I will say though, despite the fact that I said I only like them when Bedelia pegs Hannibal, there is this one fic that I read written by Tay that is actually about the missing scene of Bedelia and Hannibal during season 3, and it's amazing. It has like dub con and non-con in it, so it's like really angsty, but it's like the most perfect thing I've ever read.
Yeah, I have to say I think it's a really interesting relationship. I think actually in a way Brian ships it, and he ships it because he doesn't show them having sex. That's kind of how he operates. But in a way, I would say the power struggle between Bedelia and Hannibal is like even more toxic than the one between Will and Hannibal in some ways.
I would agree with that.
I think the more Bedelia actually got closer to Hannibal, actually the more turned off she was by him. And with Will, it's kind of quite the opposite.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Bedelia is an original character of Brian's, right? Like she doesn't show up in any of the books or movies.
Yeah. She's a totally original, and I think it was just like he thought that Hannibal should also have a therapist. That's something that typically occurs in real life, and obviously it gives you a lot of leeway to explore what those conversations are like, right?
I think for me, it's just that I empathize with Will too much. So like just seeing Bedelia on screen is like, I get that catty bitchiness of like, I want to see you like trip and fall on your face. Like,
I find it very interesting that, and I think, Max just brought this up as well, that originally Bedelia was going to be Angela Lansbury. And so, I would have loved to have seen that. That would have been amazing, sort of mommy dearest kind of dynamic, maybe. I don't know. So I find it really interesting that Brian tends to, again, it seems to be this example where he just goes and changes, allows the relationship between the characters to evolve, to change naturally as it happens in the show.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you are on Dan Lavery's mailing list. So Dan Lavery is Dear Prudie, right? It's Dear Prudie for Slate, and has a wonderful mailing list with just about the stuff they watch and that sort of thing. And recently actually he had been watching Hannibal. And so one of the things that he was talking about in this mailing list is that actually Hannibal has very, very strong mommy energy. He's got, yeah, so it's like if you had a character as Bedelia who is even more mommy energy than Hannibal, like that would have been just like doubly, triply mommy energy on the screen. And that's not something that you get, and that's why it kind of relates probably back to, is this more kind of like an old-fashioned melodrama, right? Like where things like that happen.
And I suppose we would have been denied the wonderful snarkiness between Will and Bedelia, which is also so much fun to write. And
Yeah.
I will never write anything other than Hanagram. I'm afraid that's but I have written Bedelia in several fics, and my most fun day is putting together Will and Bedelia in a scene, and it doesn't matter the genre, just let them go at each other. It's fantastic. Writes itself.
Yeah.
How about Alana and Will?
No.
My stance on pretty much on almost all of these ships is gonna be only if the woman pegs the man. I love it. So only if Alana pegs Will, then I'm totally for.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's an interesting point because, a lot of I think but like a lot of the reason people write slash is because that has a different sense of energy about the power differential than in a heterosexual relationship, so it might have to be a slightly more offbeat presentation of a heterosexual relationship to get kind of that same energy going, right?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, for me, my main problem with Will and Alana is Will, because he put her up on a pedestal at that time when he was interested in her, when he did have that crush on her. It was very much, I had a discussion with another Fannibal once where we kind of agreed that it almost was like she was his missing mommy, like it was mommy vibes in a different way, like it was because he never had a mom. And it almost felt like the way he looked up to her was a very she could take care of me kind of thing. And I really did not like that at all. I was like, you don't want to be with her for the right reasons, is really the way I read their relationship.
Yeah. And I think Alana was aware that she didn't want to be with Will for the right reasons. And that's why she was kind of trying to draw that boundary with him. Alana and Hannibal. What about Alana and Hannibal?
My answer is still the same. Only if Alana pegs Hannibal.
Yeah. I have to say that's probably the one that bothered me the most on the show, and maybe I think because I don't know if realistic is the right word to use, because the situation they found themselves in season 2 was not what I would call a really realistic situation, overall speaking. But I thought it was a realistic way of showing these three people, Will, Hannibal, and Alana, getting into a kind of very, very toxic, dramatic iteration of their relationship with each other, and Hannibal trying to use Alana against Will, Alana being with Hannibal for the wrong reasons at that point, compared to where she was kind of at the beginning of the show. And so I think that actually bothered me a lot when it happened on the show itself.
Yeah, I felt like she was just really done dirty in that entire situation, because she was the only one out of the loop pretty much on everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And I was frustrated with her a lot too in that season, because, I was frustrated a lot with the way she was sort of still handling Will with kid gloves, but then at the same time was sort of started trusting him less and everything. And but even then, even when I was getting more annoyed with her, I just really hated how much like she was in the middle, literally like just smack dab in the middle of all of this, and the last person to know anything that was going on, like literally the last person to know, pretty much.
Yeah. I feel like Alana and Hannibal, like hardcore shipping them, definitely gives Alana a lot of disservice, But I will say that I think people who are into Alana and Hannibal probably are into it because of how involved Will is in it. Like Hannibal says canonically, like, we'll never actually be alone, right? And I think that dynamic does throw some interest in it for me. I mean, there's a lot of like jokes out there about people saying like, oh, during sex, Hannibal says Will's name, you know? Like people make those jokes all the time. Again, I feel like that does a disservice to Alana's character, but I think that's an understanding that most of the fandom has of their pairing, is that Will is somehow involved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we get to actually show is you don't get them. You actually do get them having sex, actually. So I tell a lie there, but you get them kind of lying in bed afterwards and just like talking about Will, you know, and
Yeah.
and it's like, come on, guys, you know, there's like a third party in this bedroom, you know, and you're both psychiatrists and you can't see this about yourselves. Yeah, exactly.
But I do remember in season 1, Alana admitting that a large part of her fascination with Will was professional.
Yeah.
And she did admit that. I don't think that she was completely the innocent lamb in all of this. And given the fact that Will, who was supposed to be this amazing friend of hers, was saying, it's Hannibal, it's Hannibal, it's Hannibal. And then she went, it was almost as if she got involved with Hannibal, almost to sort of thumb her nose at Will a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So I think that her motives were not pure either. And but again, it's not something that I would ever write as a pairing. Because it just winds me up too much. Or I like writing about Will and Hannibal discussing it, because there's so much potential for angst there. But that would be it.
What about lesser known characters from Hannibal or from the Hannibal extended universe? So again, Allegra, I think, writes more of these. I don't know if anybody, like any of you others, have written fic from the Hannibal extended universe. Theo, you have?
I've written Space Dogs. I've also written Brownham, Matthew and Will together.
Yeah.
And I don't know the ship name. Oh, Dollargram. So Francis and Will together.
Yeah. So Matthew was pretty popular in season 2. Like there was a period where that pairing was very popular.
Yeah, there was a period of time where like I favored that over Hannigram a bit, because I was so mad at Hannibal and everything that he did to Willett by the end of season 1 that I was just like, he deserves better than you. So
I've written a Francis and Will fic too. It was just a smut fic. I've also written a Peter Bernardone x Will fic for a Rare Pair event. I was really upset when I found out that the fandom had existed for this long and there was only one fic in that tag, and it was only a side pairing, so I was really up in arms about that. It's one of my favorite pairings. I've also written, as far as like lesser known Hannibal characters go, I've also written a Georgia Madchen-centric fic, which I really like. That was also for another fandom event called Hannibal, which was based around the woman of Hannibal. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about Georgia, but she's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah. So a lot of the season 1 characters actually have a lot of, you know, they show up for 1 episode or 2 episodes, but they're really characters with a lot of potential when you kind of think about them, you know, especially the ones that have like a little more of a relationship with Hannibal. You know, so there was actually a question from avid readers, so I'm jumping around a little bit, but she actually asks, how does one promote lesser known characters from Hannibal or from the HEU? And adds in brackets, is like trying to get children to eat vegetables. So I've actually had a little bit of that experience, and I'm actually okay with it, because I just kind of feel that people are going to read what they want to read, and if they're into Hannigram, they're probably just purely filtering on Hannigram, and you know what, that's okay, because I write what I want to write. So I've written some stories where I'm very proud of the story, but it definitely has kind of like 1/10 of the readership of my more Hannigram focused stories. And I don't know that I would have expected anything different. So I guess it just never really kind of crossed my expectations in any way. But if you're curious. I mean, I've written stories about Hannibal's past, about Misha. I've written stories about Chiyo. Chiyo is actually a character that I quite like. Um, I like the fact that actually this is a show where there are race-bent characters. There's actually more than one Asian woman, and they're actually both really different. You know, these are all kind of things that Brian Fuller put into the show, you know, and I think it's great. So I don't know. How do other people feel about it? Have you ever had that experience?
I've actually had more of an issue with like extreme kinks. I won't go into detail about it, but like a lot of times the fics that I really like might go into certain topics that a lot of people won't click on.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to ships, for the Peter Bernardone ex Will fic, I did also tag Hanagram in it because it was a side pairing. So that's probably one of the reasons why that fic actually got views, is because it was in the Hanagram fic tag. And I'm not saying you should tag Hanagram in it if Hanagram isn't in it, like only tag if it's actually in the fic. But if you can fit Hanagram in, that will probably at least get your fic on other people's radars more often, just because more people filter for Hannibal and Will.
Yeah.
I've never written a fic that was based around other characters, and I don't think I've written HEU either. No, I haven't.
No.
Blimey. But what I do like doing is featuring other characters in fics from Hannibal. So, you know, I've written Franklin, and I've written Alana. I've sort of written. No, I don't. I haven't really featured other pairings so much. I've paired up some characters, sometimes in weird ways, but they're always on the sidelines. I've never featured them, just because that's, I don't know. My passion is Hanagrams.
Your passion is Hanagram.
Yeah.
Allegra, what about you? I mean, what's, you know, your experience in writing HEU? Do you pick what you write there in terms of what you want to achieve with the story dynamic?
I am a big fan actually of Chili Willy.
Okay, that's a good one.
Because he's, I feel like I identify with him a little bit. He's very flawed. He's very narcissistic. He also suffers from imposter syndrome. So he's both, he's incredibly vain and insecure, and it all mirrors in the way he communicates with Will and with Hannibal. So every interaction between Chilton and his surroundings, yeah, is always comedy in a way, because you always know more than him. You can always speak to him, which with Hannibal is a different thing, I guess. So somehow Chilton is my favorite character to write, but to be honest, it's a bit hard because every season there is a little less of him. And I mean, if we get a season 4 and he'll be like this brain in a jar, I'd be really pissed, to be honest, because I mean, what I'm gonna write, I mean, this is gonna not be very sexy.
Yeah, but I don't know. You could always make it work, right? Even if he's a brain in a jar.
I really wanted you to write a like brain in a jar smut fic now.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, totally for that.
Be plugged into the matrix, but it's true because sometimes when you look at Chilton, especially in season 2, when things start going haywire for him, like you almost sit there being like, you know, Will kind of seems like a hot mess, but Will is actually dealing with this much better than Chilton is, you know. And yeah, I like that one. I think somebody else in the chat also mentioned Will and Hannibal with Anthony Dimmond. That's another one that came up. So I think Dimmond was a fun character in season 3. All right. So now we're going to move on to the darker stuff. So kinks, maybe a little more triggering material. There's not actually a lot of questions. So I'm going to do this kind of hand gesture. If anybody wants to mute this part, you know, we'll do this hand gesture once we move on to another section of the topic. So a question from 4 Round. So are there kinks or personal triggers you would not write about when you began writing fan fiction that you now have no problem writing. And I would add to that, is there anything like that that's also true of the way you read fanfic?
I guess I can go first on that one. I always liked the idea of what I'm writing right now. I always sort of had an idea in my head for years of the story Body and Blood that I've mentioned, which is Will is only 15 and he is also Hannibal's genetic son.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both underage and incest, and it's something that I've always had an interest in as like in a story, and I've read those kind of things, but I was never comfortable with writing it. It's only been after being years in the fandom that I've gotten to the point where I'm comfortable with actually sharing a story about that with other people and being like, oh, by the way, this is also a thing that I really want to write for you guys and drag you to hell with me over. As far as reading, the only thing I think that I've read that I historically wouldn't have read is I've read one or two cheater fics, and I would never write one because I just really don't like it. But if it's done really well, there are a few that I've actually read. There's one by what's the author's name? I think it's Earthsick Without You or something like that, where Will is cheating on Molly by like doing like having like phone sex with Hannibal while Hannibal's in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And like I really love that story. It's one of my favorites, but I normally wouldn't touch that topic with a 10-foot pole.
Allegra, how about you?
Okay, how does this work again with the hand gesture?
It's okay. I mean, in this section, I think we're just talking about anything that might be triggery or not. So I will give a hand gesture once the questions are over in this section. Globally
right.
speaking.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there is one king that I've never written about, and which kind of like not because it interests me, but I just want to have this experience of how do I write this? How can you make this remotely sexy? And that's that. Because it's like the big thing in fandom. Like I think every person that I've met actually in fandom said everything's okay with me except that. I won't read it. I won't write it. And because of that, I mean, I want to write it also because there's the reigning scat porn queen of the world apparently is from Austria.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's an Austrian porn star. She's been doing scat videos for like 40 years. And her own daughter is continuing her legacy. And
wow.
Like, yeah, and that's like what Austrian's porn scene is kind of famous for. That's awesome. Is scat porn. So I thought, well, you know, me being from Austria, maybe I should also do like, you know, should also do my country the honor. Yeah. So it's something that interests me, but I have no idea if I will ever be able to do it because I think it's a very normal middle class thing to be repulsed by it.
Yeah, I think there's some really fascinating questions that opens up that I don't think we necessarily have a huge amount of time for. But you know, like what is actually behind having certain kinks or certain, you know, in a way, I think triggers are actually more easily understandable than kinks. You know. I read some books by the science fiction author Chuck Delaney, and he's written some erotica, gay erotica, essentially in his books. And he's into scat, and he talks about how he just feels that it's a marker of people with imagination. You know, that you can expand your imagination to finding certain things sexy that at first glance are not necessarily sexy. You know,
yeah, exactly. That's also like this porn queen, this porn actor was also interviewed, and the way she spoke about it was a little bit like, you know, you're in this elite club. like she's you know, she ascended. Yeah. She's different than the normcore people.
Yeah. We feel the happy few, you know.
Yeah. And so I feel like maybe I'm trying to get into this club. Maybe that's just me being like, I want to be in this club.
That's right. Alex, what about you?
I have I used to be very, very safe in what I read in terms of it was sort of the generic happy ever after thing. I'm much more open to reading all different kinds of things now. I'm still not quite brave enough to write them. I don't know why. I'm just because other people do it so much better than I know I could. But I can't. The things that I would never write are the things I would never read, and it's. I think it's the same sort of things. It's unfaithfulness. I just can't deal with it at all. I don't know why, because that's got nothing to do with anything in my life experience or my family's at all. But I just can't.
I think, well, I mean, I think that's very common, actually. I've often heard people say that that's some content that they really cannot deal with in a fic. And, you know, I think it's just that, you know, people find it a very hurtful thing in reality, you know, and you don't necessarily want to explore that.
Yeah. Again, it's not that it triggers anything in me, because I don't, you know. But also, death. No, major character death. I can't read it, no matter how great the fic is. Oh, and the other thing, which is a bit weird because it's the Hannibal fandom, I can't read amputation or bits getting taken out of Will or Hannibal. I can't. So those are the three things I've tried, and you know. But other than that, I'm pretty open to reading most stuff, I think. But writing, I've not become as adventurous yet as I think I might eventually.
Yeah.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. At some point in my life in the past, I'm vaguely certain I used to not be into like gore, snuff, or necro. But I would say that now in certain parts of fandom, that's actually what I'm known for. But as far as like my limits go, one of my limits is actually scat, though I have a friend who's really into scat. And also for necro, it has to be freshly dead necro. Like, I do not deal with decomposition. No zombie fucking, they have to be freshly dead.
It's got to be an aesthetic corpse.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That seems very reasonable, you know. Yeah, I have to say, like, I don't think I write a lot of dark content, actually. You know, maybe certain things that are emotionally disturbing. I don't tend to write dark content. I will pretty much read everything. You know, I'm probably only care about the quality of the prose at that point. So I've definitely read some really far out stuff in Hannibal fandom, but you know, I feel that that's what fandom is for. You know, it's for expanding the imagination. But so there's another question which is kind of following up to this a little bit, which is, you know, Hannibal is itself a dark horror story. So Hannibal itself contains triggery content, and not just, you know, people's limbs getting chopped off, but there's medical abuse, you know, there's familial abuse, there's gaslighting, there's all forms of just sort of people psychologically abusing each other, abusers abusing each other. Brian Fuller has laid some ground rules around this, as we know. He sort of publicly talked about not wanting to portray sexual violence against women on the show. It's sometimes a little bit debatable whether he kind of sticks to the letter of this, or he sticks to the spirit of this. You know, you've had things like you know, Margot's kind of forced abortion and that sort of thing, where you could very legitimately say that's actually sexual violence being perpetrated on her, certainly sexualized violence being perpetrated upon her. But I guess the question is, so, you know, and we do write fanfic where we're kind of going for it and exploring dark things. How do you think the show's own ground rules interact with your fan fiction? You know, are you going to say, like, is there something I'm not going to write about actually because it doesn't belong in the show, or it doesn't belong with this canon?
I can go.
No.
Okay, wait. So as far as like ground rules from the show that might affect my writing, usually I only consider it if I feel like it'll break the reader's suspension of disbelief. Like there are certain things that I feel like just don't fit with the aesthetic of the show, so I might change what happens in the plot because I feel like it would break the spell that Hannibal has kind of like put over everything. But usually I have no problem with sexual violence against any character. But I think I do have an exception in Hannibal fandom, and that's Molly. I think it's just because she had so much shit put on her in the show. Like, she did not deserve anything that happened to her, that I'm very unwilling to, like, be mean to her in fic. But that doesn't really have anything to do with Brian Spooler's ground rules. That's just, like, my own personal preference.
Okay. Anybody else? Theo?
I guess I tend to really like non-con and dub-con and stuff a lot, but for me, I guess more of the hard no is I don't want to see like really painful, awful non-con. A lot of like the non-con I'll write is actually, or dub-con is like something that Hannibal is doing to Will, and I know that in reality, obviously, there's no difference in, regardless of intention or anything like that, it's all the same shade of bad. But in a fic setting, I don't want to see, you know, like Hannibal being like just really cruel and punishing about it. I still want to see that obsessive love. I don't want him to be trying to humiliate Will when he's doing that. I don't want him to be trying to actually damage him or harm him. I want it to be more of, I'm so desperately obsessed with you that I'll have you whether you want me to have you or not. And that's more of where I go with that sort of idea. So I guess that's fairly what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, I would, so I guess I would say, you know, I just come off saying that I would read pretty much anything. I am bothered by some things, and I don't think I'm bothered by anything that Will or Hannibal would do to each other in a fic, right? In that sense. I think the thing that sometimes does bother me is when people use, you know, sort of create kind of like sexualized murders as sort of plot points, like murders of the week, you know, and because I've felt that that was something that Brian Fuller really kind of tied himself into knots not to do, because it would be so easy to do that, because that's what serial killers are in reality, you know. It would be very, very easy to have it kind of go that kind of, you know, sex crimes unit sort of thing, where it's just, you know, murder prostitute every week. And he really was, you know, that's something he really wanted to avoid. So I feel like to use that type of murder, and I find it actually kind of interesting, because often what people do is they look at the dynamic of the show, which is, here's a murder of the week, and I'm going to take this and contextualize Will and Hannibal through the murder of the week. And that is what the show does. And so if you're trying to write a sex fic with with Will and Hannibal, often a lot what people do is, oh, I'm going to create a sexualized murder of the week. And I'm going to use that to bring sex into the conversation between Will and Hannibal, which actually is not to say that that's unrealistic in the context of the show and their relationship, but it kind of definitely makes it seem that you're making somebody be raped and murdered in order for Will and Hannibal to have sex, you know, and so I tend to sometimes have an issue with that.
Yeah, that reminds me, like, another thing that's sort of a hard no for me a lot, like, I don't tend to want to read it and I wouldn't write it, is Will empathizing with sex criminals and, like, feeling like sexual violence is something he, in his head, wants to do because of empathizing too much with, like, a rapist or something like that. I'm big no. I think that's something I just can't handle.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit what I'm talking about as well. You know, I think it's not entirely thought through when people write those things.
It definitely did influence me when I was writing Marriage, because I knew that in the second volume I wanted to bring Marlana in. They were going to discover Will and Hannibal in Argentina, and the one thing I did not want to do was to have either of them injured by Will or Hannibal, or to there was even a point at which Will was going to be he had a gun, and I think I even had him pointing it a bit away from them or something, because I just didn't want to I suppose I wanted to honour that part of what Brian was saying about how these two get their happy ending, you know.
Yeah.
At least for a while. I was certainly not going to go into what it would take to break that.
Yeah. And honestly, I wouldn't either. So we'll see what the show of it might eventually bring. Allegra, do you have some thoughts on this one?
You mean about the question if there would be anything if I wouldn't write because it's in the show?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was actually quite interesting what you said about the serial murders and the serial kill of the week, because I always felt like that Brian Fuller only had them so he could
Okay.
sell the show to NBC. And then as soon as he got them on the hook, he actually didn't care about them any longer, and he focused on the energy between Will and Hannibal much more than actually introducing these murders. But I think the only thing that I wouldn't do is probably focus on sexualized killings of women, on the misogyny that is usually typical for this kind of shows. I think often a core element actually, and I think it's very admirable of Brian Fuller that he actually managed to steer this show away from it more and more. I mean, he did have to do it kind of in the first episodes to, I guess, also to follow, so to follow procedural, to get NBC hooked basically. And then as soon as the show was running, I think after the sixth episode already, he abandoned this concept more and more. And I think this is something that I would kind of follow suit in a way. I would also not want to write this kind of thing.
Right. So you would just move away from that entirely. You know, that was something that was a structure, and there's no need to hew to that structure in any way.
Yeah, I think he was consciously moving away. Also, that he was using women only in the beginning, and then he moved actually away and used also men, for example, for his murder tableaus. Which is, when you think of it, it's very rare in this kind of show that men are presented as victims, that you can see them objectified in such a manner. And I think that's actually more interesting to me as a female viewer. Because I'm almost numbed by seeing female sexualized corpses on TV all the time. So that's something maybe that rubs me the wrong way, or that's something that I notice and dislike and actually like about Brian Fuller, that how quickly he managed to steer his own show away from that concept.
Yeah, exactly. To just completely avoid that cliche. Okay, so I think we're going to move on. So I'm going to do the hand gesture. So we're now going to leave the trigger zone, or the dark zone. There have been some questions about your relationship with the reader as the writer. So do you interact with your readers? How do you interact with your readers? Does feedback ever influence the direction of your writing? I mean, we know Brian Fuller is actually sometimes influenced by feedback from his authors, and elsewhere. Do you interact?
Comments, definitely. Like, I make a point of always, even if I sometimes take a while to do it, I make a point of getting back to pretty much every comment that comes my way. And I've had a lot of really fun conversations with readers in the comments and everything. It is, I'd say it probably has influenced some of my writing to a certain extent, in the sense of I get questions sometimes like, oh, what does this mean? Like, what's going on here? And I'm like, it's actually something that I already had thought of for the story, but being asked it directly in the comments made me realize, oh, maybe I wasn't clear enough. How can I, like, in the next chapter kind of clarify what I meant by this, clarify what's going on here? So it's not so much that it's influenced the direction of my story as it's influenced sort of, I guess, the more mechanical side of, like, I need to actually be paying attention to make sure that everything that I'm putting on that's in here is actually getting on the page in a way that makes sense and isn't just like me letting people just assume things. That's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I think I do that too. Yeah, like I think I sometimes get into these things where I think something is super obvious in the fic, and then it absolutely is not obvious to anybody who's not me. And so the comments really allow me to gauge that if I'm writing something that is a work in progress, and that's kind of coming up, you know.
Um, I write one shots, so there isn't really an opportunity for things to influence the direction that a story will go in. But I will say that I'm also a very strict outliner and planner. So I think the likelihood of someone's comment changing the direction of the fic is very, very unlikely. But there was this one incident where I was a little insecure about a fic that I put up, and I thought the pacing was off. And someone made a comment saying, "Oh, I really like this fic, but maybe it was a little rushed." So I ended up rewriting it and like updating it and like changing the publication date because of that comment. So I don't think it would have made much of a difference if I hadn't already had that insecurity beforehand. But I do sometimes get comments that are asking questions about my fic, but it's usually I'm very, very strongly like death of the author. So usually if someone has an interpretation that's different from me, or if they have a question about something that they didn't understand in the fic, I usually just tell them, like, you can interpret it however you want. You can fill in the blanks however you want. Like, now that I've written it and put it out into the world, it's yours. You do what you want with it. And I think that attitude is definitely something that will also, if I ever write a long fic, will make sure that someone's comment probably won't affect me too much while I'm writing something.
Yeah. Now, do you feel that there is any kind of responsibility that lies between a fanfic writer and the content consumer? You know, like, should people be leaving kudos, praising the work, paying for content? You know, should they be actively potentially defending the fanfic author? From the other perspective, like you as the author, like, do you feel you have responsibilities to your audience in some way? Or maybe a better word would be courtesy.
I think that everyone should be courteous no matter what, because it's a transaction, it's a relationship between reader and writer. We put our work out there, and we are making ourselves vulnerable, if you like, to anyone who comes along and wants to write any kind of comment. But I also think that if we're going to write fic, then we have to have, to some degree, some kind of thickness of skin, because otherwise it's, you know, we might as well just stuff our writing in a drawer. But I mean, I love having interactions with readers. And yes, I love seeing kudos counts go up. I do think that, like it or not, that is, it is a barometer that we use for ourselves. But I value more than anything comments, because they can, you know, you were saying earlier, you were asking, do readers' comments help direct your fics or influence the way the fic goes? Usually my long fics are at least halfway finished before I start posting them, but I've never actually managed to completely do one, finish one first. And that's almost deliberate, because I do like to see how people are responding to certain situations or characters or plots. And I would never change or introduce something that didn't appeal to me, but I do think that it's a transactional relationship, and we can be inspired by readers just as much as they can be by us, I think.
Allegra, what do you think?
Well, in terms of my own writing, I mean, the only like real responsibility I have really is sometimes the impatience of readers, because they really want to have my characters have sex, and they write too much, whatever plot, whatever. No one cares for that. It's like, just get to it quickly. That's one thing. But also, for another universe, for another fandom, I wrote a work in progress. I started out very optimistically that this will be like my greatest work in life. basically. It's gonna be like this war and peace
Uh-huh.
info. But I think after like 20 chapters, I really started hating the guy, the
Okay.
actor. So I fell
Okay.
out of it. But readers continued to kind of write about it and like comment on it and ask for it. And
Yeah.
then that was actually the moment where I also felt, well, there is obviously somehow a kind of obligation that I feel, I feel kind of responsible for their emotions a little bit. And it's been like, I think 3 years, and I still get the odd comment, please
Yeah.
update. When are you going to update? I see this fic was abandoned in 2000 so and so. When will you come back? I sometimes I want to type never, and then I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, but I feel this obligation, like I actually owe some kind of explanation. And in terms of directing, the direction, I sometimes notice that I write a character as an extremely unlikable character. I think sometimes we all do that, and we like to do that. It's kind of like we enjoy writing someone like as a villain, for example. And then there will be commenters saying, "Oh, this bitch, I hate her. I hope she dies," or "I hate this character." And then as a when I read these comments, I'm like, "Oh no, I have to write her nicer next chapter. I feel bad for her now." So yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
because then you realize you really have an impact, maybe even just like an overflow impact on how this character can be perceived in canon or something, and
Yeah,
because
and
people,
then I feel bad, and
yeah,
then I'm like, okay, no, I'm just gonna change. I'm gonna let her do something really nice next chapter.
yeah, 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 no,
Yeah, I would say specifically that's a problem that probably comes up for Alana and Jack a lot. Of they tend to get really demonized in fics, and I think it's fine, for you to write in your fic that they're like basically the full-on antagonist in a story, but there needs to be some care with how it's done, because we get a lot of people who just say like they unapologetically absolutely can't stand Jack Crawford as a character, and I'm like, I write him as the antagonist a lot because he kind of is the antagonist to Will and Hannibal, but I really like his character. I think he's one of the most morally strong characters in the entire series, who actually knows what his sense of right and wrong is, and he's done some things I don't like in the way he's treated Will, but he is also aware of that and has many times tried to be better about it, and it's just something that's difficult for him as a character to move past the fact that he's more interested in the greater good than he is in how Will feels.
yeah,
So
exactly. Like he's not a simplistic character, he is a very steady character. He doesn't change all that much ultimately, but he's not simplistic, Jack. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a Jack apologist. This has got me in a few arguments with people. Nothing bad, but as far as like responsibilities that the writer or content creator has for content consumers, I really think the only responsibility you have is tagging and warning. That's the baseline. Past that, I feel like people will do what they want with the fic. They'll read it how they want. They'll consume it through their own lens, and there's nothing you can really do to control that. And on the flip side, I mean, I really love comments and kudos. I think most authors do, but I also think part of the reason why I value them so much is because I know they're voluntary. Like if I got the inkling that I felt like a reader felt obligated to leave a comment, the comment would mean a little less to me, So I feel like obviously I love comments, but if you don't want to leave a comment, then I feel like people shouldn't feel obligated to and also, I totally lost my train of thought. So, okay, I guess that's it.
All right. Well, you know what? There's not a lot of minutes left, so I want to give ourselves some time to plug ourselves, to promote ourselves, and to promote others. So just a couple of questions first, actually. So Sam Fevet asks, do you own physical copies of any of your stories? And/or have you sold them? Would you consider selling physical editions of your stories? Well, I can start because I actually have physical copies of Radiance and Ravage, and I'm in those anthologies, and I'm very proud of them, you know, and I show them around. And I actually made chaplets for one of the cons in London where Hugh and Brian was there, and I gave them copies. I was actually sort of planning to make a bunch of copies and give them out, but my sort of process for making these things were sort of like way too torturous, and so I ended up making just kind of like 2 or 3 and just giving them to Brian and to the cast. But yeah, I would say that I really like having physical copies because I'm just a very tactile person. So I still to this day prefer physical books to ebooks. And you know, speaking of in the 90s, I was one of those people who was printing out giant reams of fic on dot matrix printers. A nice 90s anecdote, and when I was a teen, and this was like 1997, I once sent such a long fanfic thing to a school printer. I hadn't realized it was that long, that it actually tied up that computer lab printer for like 2 hours. That dot matrix printer just like, and it was like, who was this, you know? And it's like at that point you can't claim that printout anymore. So you're like, not me. I didn't print that. Anybody else? Maybe just make little chapbooks? No?
I've never printed out my own works. I've definitely printed out other people's works. It's not something I do anymore, especially because I don't actually own a printer anymore. But as a kid, like as a teenager in high school and everything, back with the good old days of like slow internet and everything, yeah, I would print out 30 chapter fanfics at school and so I could bring them home to read them at home at my leisure. I've also occasionally printed out some of like my favorite comments, or in some way I've saved some of like my favorite comments that people have left on my fics, just sort of when I need like a good little feel-good boost or something like that.
Yeah.
I've got
No, go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
I've got Radiance and Ravage as well. So I've got stuff in those, and I keep having these plans, which I never seem to carry through, to print the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the first volume of it, because it's self-contained and it's only about 15,000 words, so it wouldn't take much. I'd love to have that in a little book. And Ethics and Aesthetics, I have this dream of having that as a physical book, because the Sea Voices did all these beautiful illustrations for it, and I just love to see them in there in color, and
Yeah.
I really would. So that's a dream for the future. But we'll see. I think I'd have to change the surnames, wouldn't I? There are things you have to do to get something in a book. But
but that would be a wonderful one to see printed. Yeah, I do agree.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I am in one NSFW fanzine, but it's not Hannibal fandom. So there are physical copies of my fic floating around, but I actually did not. They offered to send me like a free copy of the zine, and I said no because I'm not yet an independent adult, and I don't want my mom stumbling across like porn in my room. So I decided, like, you know what, it's fine. I don't really need a physical copy of it. I don't know if I'd ever want a physical copy. Maybe one day if I live by myself, obviously, it would be nice. But yeah.
So there have been quite a few questions circling around this. So I want to make sure we do get to it. What is your own favorite fic that you've written? So we'll just go around. We'll start with Allegra. Allegra, what's your own favorite fic that you've written?
That's a bit hard to answer actually, because I really don't have favorite fics in that sense. But maybe only the only story I wrote where I felt like the sense of accomplishment a little bit was a Chilly Willy.
Okay.
And I managed to actually finish a 20 chapter story, and that made me kind of proud that I actually started out something writing and I managed to end it. Story wise, to be honest, not the greatest plot. Very I mean, I actually missed my goal because I wanted to write a coffee shop AU. I like this genre in itself. I just don't really read very much of it, but I like the idea of it, that you take characters of a very dark universe and then you give them somehow a nicer life, so to say, a more romantic setting. And I'm not sure if I achieved that because the story veered into a sort of darkness and I really liked it. But yeah, this is maybe this one Chilly Willy is the one accomplishment I have, because I feel like this is the only story that I really wrote from the beginning to the end. But not sure if it's like a great fic in the sense of is it good writing? Probably not.
Well, but that's it. I think it's the question is about what it means to you personally. Theo, what's yours?
I had to really think about this. I think my favorite fic is always going to change because it is always going to be whatever I'm writing right now.
Okay. That's a good attitude to take. Yeah.
That's basically the one I'm writing right now is like just my favorite thing of all time, but I literally do think that every time I'm writing something different. If I have to go with like a story I've actually finished already, I guess my Rocky Horror AU, The Stars Burn Brightest on the Coldest of Nights, that's the one that took me like 3 years to write 4 chapters of a story, and I think that would be one of my favorite ones because it took some directions I wasn't expecting it to when I initially started it. I actually had different ideas in mind for how it would go, and then as the years went on and I finally got back to working on it, I was like, oh, I didn't realize, but Bedelia here, the thing she was doing, and then and it turned into, in my opinion, a way cooler story than it ever would have if I'd actually finished it when I intended to within like a couple of months. So that's probably one of the ones I'm proudest of.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes it's, what they call trunk stories, right? Like you pull it out of the trunk and then you're like, oh, now I know what's going on with this one and I can make it happen. Alex, what about you? What's your favorite?
It's very difficult for me to choose between marriage and ethics and aesthetics, but I think possibly ethics and aesthetics has the edge just because it was the first time I'd written ABO and I had a hugely entertaining time researching knots and heats and then coming up with my own version of that as well. And I thought it worked well as a metaphor for the repression in society at the time as well, social repression. And because I set it here in Derbyshire, which is where I live, and a lot of it I set at this big country estate called Chatsworth House, which is owned by the Duke of Devonshire. And I go there a lot. And I went there a couple of weeks ago with my mum and I said, oh, there's Will and Hannibal's tree. That's the tree that they had their first kiss beneath. And she's like, okay.
That's incredible. Yeah, I didn't realize like you had settings like around you that you could actually access. That's awesome.
It's all set in real, the inside of Ravenstag House. And Lady Bedelia's house, can't remember what I called it. Those are real settings. I mean, I could take people on a tour. This is where
I think you should plan on booking that sometime in the future, once all this sort of situation in the world is over, I would love to take a tour of that. Kazu, what about you? What's your favorite?
I think probably my favorite fic is a fic titled Oneric, and it's mainly my favorite fic because Wormson, who wrote my favorite Hannibal fic commented on it and said that they really liked my prose. So I'm really proud of that. But also that fic is what, like I mentioned before that I'm a really heavy outliner and planner. That's actually, with Oniric, my writing process was actually different because I was sticking to a writing quota at the time. So I was a lot more spontaneous with how I wrote it. And I think because of that, it has some of my favorite writing in that fic. So maybe I should try switching up my writing process a bit in the future and see if that affects my writing style. But yeah, I definitely took a different approach with that fic. And I think I really liked the outcome.
Yeah. I'd actually been thinking about this, but you know, I'm probably a little more like Theo in that I don't know if it's the one that I'm writing is probably my least favorite fic at any given moment. I think it's the opposite, but sometimes I reread my stuff and I think like, oh, you know, not to toot my own horn, but it's as if this fic was written precisely for me, and I wonder why that is. But I think in Hannibal fandom, I'd probably name two. I do really like the Here trilogy. You know, I think it's one of my more popular ones for a reason. I think I really said what I wanted to say with that fic, and I think it works really well. Um, and I think the other one that I think really does work very well is the one that I wrote for Radiance. I think it was called Churrasco. And I'd always wanted to write Clarice into a fic because she's a character with kind of like incredible potential. And there had been a period where that was sort of more explored towards the beginning of the series with fanfic authors kind of thinking forward to being like, oh, how is this going to be brought in? How are we going to do Silence of the Lambs? And then that sort of went away a little bit, you know, once the show itself started to kind of veer off and it became a little harder to imagine how that would happen. Um, but I wanted to kind of imagine one way where that content of the later Clarice books could be brought into the sort of post season 3 potential environment that Will and Hannibal were in. And in my mind, it's kind of like you could do all sorts of things with it. It's not going to be just one thing. You could do all sorts of things with it. And so this was a very short story, and it was just like, this is one thing that you could do with it. And I really enjoyed writing it, and I think it worked out well. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So we